to RFM 92.7. My name is Alex Nyman, and this is Jazz Club. So there we had Stefano Benini and with Sam Most, both playing the flute there. And if you were with me last week, you will know that this week is going to be a Jazz Club flute special. Yes, a flute special. Now, I brought all my flutes along today. I've got my piccolo, I've got my concert flute, my alto flute, my bass flute. And there are, as I mentioned last week, quite a number of other flutes that are part of the flute family. As I also mentioned, I don't have the spare $30,000 to $50,000 in my bank account with which to buy the other sort of, two or three lower end flutes, such as the alto, contralto, sub contrabass and sub contrabass flute. And to be quite honest with you, even if I did have that spare money in my account, I think I'd put it towards much better uses than buying instruments whose highest note is something like that's about as good, about as low as it goes, or high as it goes on some of them. So yes, not particularly useful for me as a jazz musician to play something that basically is sort of about an octave and a half below the contrabass or the double bass player. So I guess I could do sort of some unison lines with him. That would be interesting. Anyway, so as I said, this is a flute special. So I'm going to be playing you lots of different flute players from around the world. Some well known within the jazz world. Some other guys that probably not quite so well known, but nevertheless are great flute players. And I'm hoping kind of in a way to sort of demonstrate some of the techniques that the guys use and some of the techniques that they're not using as well, actually. And but, kind of the difference between jazz flute and classical flute, because that's where the flute started, let's face it. I suppose actually that's not true. I suppose the flute in itself started, thousands of years ago with some bloke sat in a cave, or it could have been a woman, sat in a cave somewhere with a stick that they sort of a whole piece of bamboo or something, probably Japanese, probably, maybe, and just blowing across the top of it and go, oh, well, that makes a nice sound, and that's probably how it all sort of started, really. All Indian flutes and Japanese, the ancestry of those instruments goes back thousands of years, and the shakuhachi, for example, which is a Japanese vertical played flute, I play that too. I wouldn't actually, it's not necessarily a flute as such. It does have a little lip over which you have to split the air, and that little lip itself is called the urugachi, and it's a very interesting instrument to play. It's very tricky to play. I was once when I was teaching at Massey in Wellington about 10 years ago. I remember Eric Marienthal came in for a little chit chat and what have you, and he was like, "Hey Alex," in his American Los Angeles accent, "Hey Alex, you got all these great ethnic flutes around. What's that one over there?" And I said, "Oh, that's the shakuhachi." And I hadn't only had it maybe for a little while. I could sort of, get a sound out of and everything. And, there's only 4 holes on it, so you haven't got too many fingerings to work with. And he said, "Oh, I'd really like to hear that." I said, "Okay, no worries." And I sort of picked it up and I couldn't get one single note out of it, even though I've been playing it perfectly well for the last, sort of month, 2 months, 3 months or so. When it came to the big crunch in front of Eric Marienthal, it completely died a death. And he said, "Oh, Alex, some things work and some things don't. I.e., you idiot, what are you doing trying to play that in front of me when you can't play it?" I was most ashamed. So I devoted a bit more time to it after that, and got to play it reasonably well. And it's something I do like the ethnic flutes. I really do. Some great ones. The Indian flute's fantastic. You just got to have arms about 2 miles long to play some of them, though, because they're so big. Right, now I do have my flutes surrounded me. You can't see that on the television, but I can assure you that underneath here there are a number of flutes, and they're all waiting to be unpacked. I'm going to unpack them in front of your very eyes. That's, of course, if you're watching on television. If you're not, I'll sort of make some sounds, sort of, clicky sounds and things so you'll know that what I'm doing. Of course, if you can't, if you're just listening on the radio, you can actually go ahead and watch this on Wairarapa TV, which is channel 41. You can watch it as a repeat tomorrow at 12, 5 and 11 p.m. And if you haven't got time to watch it, then you can just go onto the RFM website and just press on my podcast channel and you'll see it all on there. And I think with the wonders of modern technology, it should be up later on today. So, if you're desperate to sort of see me unpacking them, and actually I'm going to be demonstrating some embouchure things, and I suppose this is not just sort of demonstrate, flute and things like that, but there might be some flute players out there that kind of might want to sort of might be having a few problems with certain things like top notes or low notes or whatever. And some of the things I'm going to be doing, because I'm demonstrating like embouchure technique and kind of how to work the embouchure to achieve certain results on the flute. Okay, so that's enough about me yakking on about what I'm going to do. I'm going to play another track actually now by Stefano Bernini. And this is also, I believe this is also featuring Sam Most, very old, much older guy, but been playing jazz flute for a long time. And this track is called Matteo. So there was Stefano Bernini there with his flute and that particular track called Matteo. That is actually from the album called Groovin' Flute. So if you'd like to check that out at any time, please do so. It's a pretty cool album. There's lots of nice music on there. And I thought might be nice to sort of start the whole flute thing off with me. Here's my flute case. So I'm just showing that to the camera for those people at home that are not able to watch this on television. I'm showing my flute case. This is the concert flute, by the way. So now then, so this is the initial part of the flute, which for most professional flute players, this particular part here, now this is called the head joint, and this is probably the most, I wouldn't say it's the most important part of the flute, but it's one of those things, it's sort of equivalent of, I guess, like a saxophone mouthpiece, and it's sort of something that guys can spend a whole life searching for the right one, basically, and never actually finding it. God knows, I've bought enough saxophone mouthpieces to last anyone else a lifetime, and so I spent quite a bit of money on them, and I also spent quite a bit of money on this. This is about, I think it's a guy called Dana Sheridan who works out of Cologne now. He was originally over in America, and Dana is, I think, Canadian actually. Sorry, and Dana, as I say, is over in Cologne, and Cologne actually has quite a big base of specialist flute makers, especially guys that make flute head joints, as for example Dana Sheridan does. And so this is a solid silver head joint, and I don't know if you can tell in this light here, I think you probably can, that this is called the lip plate, and that is made out of gold. That's 14 karat gold, so it's all solid, and it's also lined inside there. That's all part of the same thing, so it's all lined with gold. And so what difference does that make? Well, I guess at the end of the day, it's just a metal, and there are a lot of guys, lots of different theories about flute and metal, and what difference does a metal flute make? Guys pay upwards of maybe $80,000 on a platinum flute. Does it sound better than a solid gold flute, or a solid silver flute, or a nickel-plated flute? It's really difficult to say, and I did relate this story a while back when I was down in Monte Carlo. I was a resident saxophone player down there, and at the casino and sporting club, and a good friend of mine, Kevin Jackson, came down, and he's a specialist flute player. He's a classical flute player, absolutely amazing flute player, and I was over at his apartment one night, and he was playing some, got his flute out and what have you, and he said, Alex, he said, I just want to do a blindfold test with you, and I was like, okay, fine, no worries. So he said, what do you think of this one? He went, diddly-diddly-diddly-diddly, whatever. And I said, oh yeah, okay. He said, now I'm going to play this one. See what you think. He said, now which one honestly did you prefer? And I thought, yeah, well, I think it was actually the second one actually sounded quite a bit better than the first. And I looked around and he had his head held firmly in his hand, shaking it from side to side, going, the first one was my £25,000, i.e. $50,000 Brannon Cooper, and the second one was the flute that I just bought for my son, which is a I don't know, $1,000 Yamaha 221 or something like that. But there you go. I mean, it's a solid silver, beautiful, gorgeous Brannon Cooper flute, made by one of the, some of the best flute players and makers in the world. And, that for me at the time, I don't know, maybe with experience, maybe my view might have changed on that. But there's also a great video of James Galway, one of the most amazing classical flute players ever, doing a black and white. It's actually shot in black and white, so you can't tell which flutes he's playing, but he plays actually 16 different flutes, and he plays exactly the same classical excerpt from whatever it is. And after a while, it gets you can just, certain flutes have a kind of a little bit more depth to them, perhaps, or a little bit more vibrancy, a little bit more brilliance. But boy, is it difficult to tell with a lot of them, and the price difference between all of those flutes is enormous. So anyway, there we have the flute head joint. Now this is a very important part of the flute, obviously, because if you don't have this, you can't play the flute. All right, so you need this. It's most important. And the essential part of the flute that you're going to be using to actually play the flute, of course, is this little hole here. This is the bit that causes problems for more people than you might imagine, because actually playing this properly is really, really quite tricky. And what most people do is that they think about a bottle. So, if you get a milk bottle or whatever, I'm not even sure they do. Do they do milk in bottles? Yeah, they still do, don't they? But they're normally plastic, aren't they? Well, you can still get a tune out of a plastic milk bottle, trust me. But the old glass ones are even better. So you might want to practice on a beer bottle or a wine bottle. Those are pretty good. Generally speaking, when people do play wine bottles or a beer bottle or a milk bottle, whatever it is, they tend to blow across the top. All right, so that's if you don't really know what you're doing, you just blow across. You're going to get a sound some way. All right, so that you just blow across the top. So if I was doing that with this particular head joint, I'm going to just have to be a little bit careful with this microphone here, otherwise I'm going to rock your ears. So I'm going to just try and. Oh yeah, see that's very, very loud, isn't it? So I'm going to put that back there. Oh, it's really going off the scale. So I'm going to bring that down there like that. So what I'm doing there is I'm actually blowing into the flute as opposed to blowing over it, which is like this. So that's what happens when you blow over the top. There's no definitive sound as such. But if you watch while I'm just turning the flute towards myself, you'll notice that the sound becomes a little bit more intense. And just bear with me, because I really am trying to sort of just balance the sound between my speaking voice. So I'm having to get quite close to the microphone, and the sound away from it with the flute. All right, so I'll do that sort of thing where I'm going to pull the flute head joint into my... So, if you're not deaf and already, and after that little demonstration, you will notice that as you bring the flute head joint towards yourself, you're actually starting to blow not across the flute head joint, but you're starting to hit the inside of the flute head joint, and that's this sort of area here. And I do hope those people that are watching on television, you can sort of see what I'm trying to get at. Unfortunately, for those people that are just listening on the radio, you'll have to take my word for it, right? But just make sure you get on the Arrow FM website and watch it on there. So you can see that there's this little area ahead, as it were. So I'm playing it like that. So now I'm turning it around so you can see it from your point of view. So this area that's furthest away from you and there, it's a very sort of finely manufactured piece of metal, as it were, because it has to be perfectly shaped, and it can be high or low, and it depends on, most professional flutes don't have like a high chimney. It's called the chimney. They don't have a high chimney, they have a sort of fairly moderate one, but it's where you aim the ear on that particular point to actually get the flute to the air inside the flute to vibrate. That's what we're looking for. We're not sort of looking to make the air, sort of vibrate over the top of the flute, as it were, but we want the air inside the flute to vibrate. And I think that's called the Bernoulli effect, judging by a lesson I was watching the other day. Is a very, very wonderful flute player, Paul, can't think of his name now, an amazing flute teacher, and he was talking about the sort of dynamics, the effects of playing, and the actual shape of the air in the flute as such. And this is all part of that kind of just getting that air to vibrate in the right way at the right sort of frequency, just so that it sounds really, really sweet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the other bit, or one of the other two bits of the flute. So this is called the main body of the flute. All right, so now you can see this at home, I'm sure. And this is a solid silver flute, and this is actually made by Yamaha, and I've had it for probably about 15 years now, and I absolutely love it. It's a really, really great flute. I have no problems with it at all. There are other great flutes out there that I've played, and they've not really kind of responded in the same way as this one. So I just stick with this one for the moment until maybe I get $50,000 and I can spend it on a platinum something or other. But in the meantime, I'll stick with this. Now, as you can see, I hope, at least for those people at home watching, you'll notice that this has open holes. So it's an open hole flute. What does that mean? Well, it means that you got more kind of access to different effects with the flute. You can do sort of half coverings of the notes and sort of stuff like that. But generally speaking, it just means that the flute kind of, for me at least, speaks a little bit better. There's more sound coming out of the flute through the whole flute, as it were. When you've got a closed hole flute, which most beginners will have, all the pads, all of these open holes here, they're obviously all going to be covered. So it can also be a problem of playing an open hole flute if you haven't played one before, because you can sort of, if you've got your fingers in the wrong position, you can actually sort of half cover the flute and then the notes won't play at all. So this is an open hole and it's got an offset G. All right, so that little one there, that's sort of set over this way, that's an offset G. You can have ones that actually have an inline G, and that is just means you've got to stretch this little finger, that one. You've got to stretch that a little bit further across to actually close the hole. It doesn't really make a huge amount of difference to the flute. It's just a question of what you're most comfortable with. So I'm actually quite comfortable with an offset open hole flute. So the last bit I'm going to get is the foot joint. So here we have my foot joint, and again it's all solid silver. And Michael's just come in the room. He's probably going to he's going to sit over there and he's going to talk to me. And I'm going to put microphone B on so Michael can you'll hear him talking when he is talking. I'm going to put the volume up as well.
So I just want to let you know, Alex, that I've been watching you on the telly as you speak and listening to you, and you're so fantastically fascinating, and I'm loving every second of it. So I've come in to tell you I'm just off out for a coffee, and I'll see you later.
Thank you very much, Michael. How kind of you.
No, it's really good. It's really good.
Excellent.
I'm fascinated to hear about the chimney.
Yes.
And whether it's a high or a low one.
It's all technical little bits. If you don't play the flute, you would never know anything about it. It's just sort of, just blow it and stuff happens, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. Well, I shall be adopting the correct embouchure for a flat white.
Enjoy.
See ya.
Thanks, Michael. Right. So anyway, as you can see, I'm just going to take I'll take the flute apart again. So now I've just put that little joint, that the foot joint goes on the main body of the flute there, as you can see. This is the head joint. All right. So that fits inside the main body of the flute. Right. So we got that there. Now, there it is basically. So that's sort of set up like that. Now, a lot of people, when they're actually starting to play the flute, will the rule of thumb is that this hole from the head joint has to be in line with the holes on the main part of the flute. It's not necessarily true. It doesn't have to be that way, because I generally find that if it is like that, then that head joint is actually sort of too far over for me. It means I've actually then got to turn the flute in to actually get the sound that I want to get out of it. So to counteract that, I actually turn the head joint in to start with, and that gives me a much more comfortable position for my hands and the actual head joint itself. So when we're looking to sort of start playing the flute, what we're talking about obviously with playing the flute, excuse me, I'm just going to have a little drink of water. When we talk about the flute, as Michael was just mentioning, embouchure. Embouchure obviously is a French word, believe it or not. Yes, it's a French word. Embouchure. It means the relationship of the mouth to the instrument. Now, that could be trombone, trumpet, saxophone, in this case, flute. So it requires a certain sort of setting of the lips to actually play the flute in the first place. Now, some guys have different ways of setting their lips before they play. Some people actually have what you call almost like a lip out embouchure, where they turn their bottom lip out like that, and then they play. For me, that really doesn't work. I find it's a little bit too sort of complicated. I need a simple approach. But what I do is actually I set my lips, and unfortunately, of course, if you're just listening on the radio, you can't see this, but I'll just move the microphone out of the way a little bit. But the difference between my lip setting normally is sort of this. That's my lips that they normally are if I'm playing the flute. Okay, so I'm actually now making a big stretch right across there. So all of this area under here is actually quite sort of stretched, and it makes for a flat lip approach here across the front, because we want this aperture that's here. I'm just pointing to that there. This little aperture has to be really quite small. It has to be able to sort of be small, larger, and then very, very fine to actually play the top notes on the flute. So I'll just give you so I'll try and sort of work with the sound as it is on the flute on the desk at the moment. If it's a little bit too loud, I apologise. So what I'm trying to do there is just first of all get my lips set. So I haven't played today, so I'm actually just taking a little bit of time just to, work around some of the flute. Of course, without any reverb or anything, the sound is very, very dry. And normally, if I'm playing at home, recording at home, I have a nice sort of like I don't know, maybe like a 3-second, 2-second delay, not delay, a reverb setting. So, you have a nice tail on the note, so it sounds very ambient. Obviously in here it's not like that, it's set up for the voice, so it has to be quite dry. And so it's not the best sound, unfortunately. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of set my lips so that I can actually sort of play all of the notes, roughly without having to sort of do too much adjustment. So I'm going to go down. So if I was practicing at home, I'd be spending a lot of time just playing long tones, going down very, very slowly, just to get the lips set so that they can actually sort of play virtually kind of almost basically with one embouchure. And the only thing that you're really adjusting actually is the aperture, which is right there in the middle. So that's that little hole that the air comes out. The whole breathing process is also very, very important, and it's something that I spend a lot of time at home working on at the New Zealand School of Music, working with my flute students there, is working on the whole breathing technique. And I think a lot of people don't understand or don't think about the breathing part of things, because if you're not playing a wind instrument, then the chances are that the only time you're really going to use your lungs to their sort of fullest capacity is probably like maybe if you're doing sports. Maybe if you're going to one of my examples for most students is when I'm talking about the sort of breath that you take before you're playing. For me, at least, is it's not the complete sort of breath that you would take just before you sort of dive into a swimming pool. You're looking to swim from one side under the water to the other. So it's the sort of breath where you'd be going, taking a really kind of lung-filling in-breath to actually play. And that's kind of the in-breath that I take most of the time when I'm playing, but I kind of like reduce the time to take the breath in, as it were. And so that, you've got a really sort of big, full lung capacity. One of the exercises that James Galway used to do, and I think he might well still do it, I'm not too sure, maybe he doesn't bother to do it nowadays, but he developed something what he called the super breath, and that was to take a breath where you exhale, basically, and then you start breathing in, but you breathe in, and then you hold it, and then you just keep on going. So at that point, I'm going to let it out now. Okay, so that point where I thought that, I'd taken the big in-breath. That's it, that's full now. No, it's not, because you can go. You're still taking more breath into your lungs, so you're expanding your lungs in that process. I mean, you can actually sort of, develop your chest if you wish to, a couple of inches, just simply by doing that sort of expanding technique. But it does make you very aware of just how much how much air you can take into your lungs before you actually exhale. And of course it's the exhaling as well, which is also a very, very important part of playing any wind instrument, and how we let the air out. And with the flute you have to, that's why most people when they're playing the flute is if they're playing like this, as you can hear, most of that air is going over the top of the flute and not into the flute. So a lot of people, when they first start playing the flute, they start to feel dizzy. And that's because they're not used to breathing in and exhaling in that sort of way. And actually what they're doing in terms of blowing over the top of the flute is that they're releasing too much air to just get one note. So you're doing this. Which is a lot different too. So I'm expanding a lot of air to achieve very, very little. Whereas if I'm actually just, really sort of fine-tuning the way that the air goes into the flute, then that means that I'm expending less air as well at the same time, but I'm getting more volume, I'm getting a better sound, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's basically sort of like where we are with, that's a very, very basic sort of rundown on where we are with the flute as such. There's a lot, the actual sort of the finer points of actually sort of getting the notes out, making them sound nice. You might have heard before that I was using something called what we call vibrato, which I'm sure you will be well aware of. With so I have to make sure the mic's up from my voice as well. You'll be well aware of the fact that when most singers, for example, they sing with vibrato, it would sound pretty dead if they didn't, right? So with vibrato, this is how we do it on the flute. So you can hear that there's different speeds of vibrato there as well. And the vibrato doesn't come from, a lot of guys will do vibrato when they're starting off, that they actually start doing it with their chin, sort of, a lip vibrato like this. Which, as you can hear, is not very nice, and it actually sort of moves the flute around on your face, and it also looks a bit silly, and it doesn't really achieve the effect. That real vibrato, I mean, a lot of people talk about sort of, they kind of like a diaphragm vibrato, so you're actually sort of undulating your diaphragm, as it were, which also is not the case. And if you listen to James Galway talking about vibrato, you'll understand that it actually comes here from the back of the throat, so we're kind of like closing. If you're actually making a sound which is more like ha 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 ha. So if I was to do it now, I'm trying to fine balance the microphone with the actual voice and the flute. So I do apologise if the flute suddenly comes in really, really loud. I'm trying to sort of balance it, and I'm looking at my levels here as well. So just bear with me. But when we're doing the vibrato, we're starting off like ha. And then what we're going to try and do is actually then join those ha 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 ha's up into one long tone. Sorry, going to have to just take the volume down a bit. So you can hear I'm trying to keep the speed. I try to sort of think of like so da 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 da, and if it's a slow vibrato, da 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 da, it's like that. You just take a tempo and then divide your vibrato in between those. So what I'm talking about there, it sounds like real easy, but actually when you try and do it and you're actually trying to blow at the same time, as well as constricting, you're not actually sort of constricting your throat as such, but it's it's making this ha 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 sort of sound. So it kind of stops the ear, lets it go, stops, lets it go, but it's so quick that hopefully it sort of just all blends into one, and it should be pretty much the same way that we do vibrato when we're singing. It's the same thing as that. I guess other people will probably have maybe a different approach to it in terms of like what they do, how they construct their vibrato. But for me, it seems to work, and it seems to work for most of my students, who eventually go on to achieve that effect, and it really does help with making it sort of a much more musical kind of sound, as opposed to a very sort of flat deadpan sound, but actually that in itself is also part of what jazz is also is about as well, is having a very kind of like, almost an expressionless kind of sound, but with the sort of like fluff of jazz to start with. So what I'm going to do, look, I'm going to go back and I'm going to play, there's a really nice flute player I've just discovered, and his name is Gerald Beckett. So I'm going to play a track by Gerald, and then I'm going to come back more, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about flute technique and sort of sounds that people are using. Okay, here we go. This is Gerald Beckett. So that was Gerald Beckett there playing some very, very nice flute. And as you probably might be able to hear there, the way that he was kind of attacking those notes had kind of like a very kind of puffy kind of sound towards the front, you know. So it's a very kind of soft, puffy. You know, you have to kind of like, you know, have to intentionally want that kind of attack on the note, as opposed to a kind of more. Kind of a more kind of like a cleaner attack, his sound actually reminds me quite a lot of Hubert Law's, whereas Hubert actually has a very much kind of has a very kind of very fast vibrato that he normally uses, and makes for a very individual sound. But the actual sort of weight of Gerald's sound is very much like Hubert Law's. I wouldn't be surprised if he's spent a little bit of time with him somewhere along the line, and so that kind of that attack on the notes, as I say, is very much a kind of a jazz thing. And I suppose the one of the things with the difference between jazz and classical flute, I mean, there are many differences, obviously hundreds, is the fact that a lot of jazz flute has originated from guys who never studied never studied classical flute, but might have just picked it up after they played the saxophone or whatever, and kind of like, you know, had their own approach to it. And that is the difference, I guess, between the main difference being that, you know, it is about the individual, and whereas with classical flute, very much depends on the person that you studied with, you know, what particular school they belong to, French, wherever, you know. If you studied with Julius Baker, the chances are, like Hubert Law's, you would end up with a very, very quick vibrato, because that's what Julius Baker had. And if you studied with James Galway, you know, you'd learn to, you know, play your pitch slightly sort of sharp of concert pitch when your vibrato is going up and coming down. That's where he is with his particular vibrato. But obviously, and thousands of other differences as well. But and actually Hubert Law's, as I just mentioned a short while ago, is one of those sort of characters who can actually sort of dance between playing classical and playing jazz as well. He's equally good at both, and it takes quite a bit of skill to do that, for sure. So we're talking about the techniques of actually making the sound on the flute, and as I mentioned last week, a lot of my students at the School of Music, I'm a saxophone teacher there, obviously, but I do insist that they, you know, at least try to learn flute and clarinet along the line, because I see them as being very important instruments to have as a saxophonist, you know, have it sort of in your armory, as it were. And one of the techniques that I often try to get them to do is called flutter tonguing, but and that consists of being able to to do this. So that's the tongue sort of vibrating at the back of the behind the teeth. But you have to kind of set that up with actually sort of blowing the flute as well at the same time. So I'll just play the note without flutter tonguing. So that's flutter tonguing, and I find it really easy to do for some bizarre reason. I have no idea why, but I've had a number of my students at the School of Music almost spit their own teeth out trying to do that, and they can't. I think one of the reasons they can't roll their R's. So which I suppose would actually make sense, really. If you can't roll your R, you probably find it difficult to go that sort of thing. But even if you can go, you've actually still got to blow through that sound to actually make the noise, to actually make the sound on the flute as well at the same time. So does it have a great deal of use in flute? Yeah, in jazz flute? Yes, it does. I mean, it's another technique with which to, sort of express yourself, I guess, as it were. And often within classical music as well, I mean, there will be parts where, you know, it will be written flutter tongue. You've got to flutter tongue. And if you can't flutter tongue, they'll probably find someone else who can. So you better learn how to do it. All right. So flutter tonguing is pretty useful. And another great, obviously, a really well-known known technique with playing flute is singing, singing at the same time. I don't mean singing words, although you can do that, but I mean I'm talking about singing the same note, or a note that's above or below the note that you're playing. And I think most people would probably be people of a certain age anyway will know of Jethro Tull and Ian Anderson, who played that dee 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 dee, whatever it was, that particular tune, where he's done where he was playing singing at the same time. And it is a very, very useful technique to have, and it creates a great deal of what should I say, attention, interest, actually within the note. So the way to do it really, when you're thinking about, if I was trying to teach a student right now, is I'm trying to sing, I'm going to play the note first. So there's the note that I'm trying to. I'm not really looking to achieve exactly the same note, because a little bit of tension within the note is also quite good. If you can sing slightly out of tune, you can sing a lot out of tune, or you can sort of really quite approximate the note as such, and it largely depends what effect you want to do. You can also, I'm going to have to move the flute a little, I'm going to move the microphone a little bit further away from where I'm sitting, but you can try and achieve, you can sort of sing to almost to a certain extent, you start to sing harmonies such as so we're getting that kind of vocal thing going on behind the notes, and obviously you want to try and be able to play, sort of something relatively jazzy at the same time. And so, I mean, we all develop our own techniques within the jazz world when we're playing flute. I mean, other guys do lots of different things. I don't spend a lot of time sort of working on different ways to sort of use that stuff, because I got other things to work on, and but it's kind of interesting. And I mentioned the other week when I had a student of mine came in, and I was doing something like, I'll do something like this. Stuff like that. So there's all sorts of amazing things that you can do with the flute, and it's largely depends on who you're playing with, what they want you to do to a certain extent, and of course if you're doing your own thing, it's largely up to you what you want to do. And when I'm at home recording, I do find, obviously, like because I have microphones set up in a way that I particularly like with a particular sound, and you find that you don't really have to spend a lot of energy in actually sort of blowing, because the sound is all there. So that's why it's really nice when you listen to guys like these guys that I've been playing for you, that obviously in very nice studios, and they're you really feel like you're in control of the sound quite a lot. And it's different to if you're playing, say, in a live situation where you might not be able to hear yourself so well, and that's when you start to overblow on the flute and do all sorts of crazy things that doesn't make it sound so good. And but yeah, there's a I mean, I absolutely adore playing the flute, and what I might do, I'll do another show at one point, and I'll get some of the stuff that I've recorded over the years, and I'll make a little show, sort of a little snippet of the show, And I'll just play some little bits and pieces that I've done with flute, so you can hear me in a kind of less live situation like this, which is, as I say, because actually playing into a microphone that's actually set up for vocals, just as a speech microphone. It's not quite the same as actually using a microphone that's been set up, for proper recording and all the nice effects that you can add to it. So anyway, so that's the concert flute. I've got my piccolo, and I've got the other couple of harmony flutes there with me. I'm going to play another track for you now. This is a guy called Dave Valentine, and he's just more kind of a Latin American flute player, and he plays some fantastic stuff. So let's have a listen to Dave Valentine, and this is a track called Bandit. That was a very beautiful playing there of Dave Valentin, Latin American flute player, and he's always been one of my big favourites. So now, as you can see, I'm holding in my hand here the baby of the flute family. When I say baby, it might be the baby in terms of size, but it's been around a lot longer than most of the other ones, that's for sure. This is called the piccolo, and of course, as you know, in Italian, piccolo means small, and this certainly is a little baby, and is also, it might be small, but it's very powerful. It's in fact the loudest instrument in the modern orchestra. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? It's true, seriously. If you listen to modern orchestras, I can assure you that if somebody's playing piccolo, you will hear it above everything and anything else. Other things might get a little bit buried somewhere along the line. The piccolo will never, ever be buried. Some people might think they might like to bury the piccolo or the piccolo player. Depending on who's playing it, but it is very, very loud. It can be very loud. It can also be very beautiful. It's a very beautiful instrument for sure. So this is my one. It says solid. This is made out of granadilla, so it's like African hardwood, and it's so as you can see with this one, unlike the flute that I had, the concert flute that I had before, this is the embouchure hole here. All right, so this particular one doesn't have a lip plate, so it's not something that I can actually it's just literally got the hole in the head joint. I prefer that, and it seems to work well for me. Other guys actually prefer a lip plate or a formed lip plate. It's called a reformed lip plate actually, but I actually prefer just the straight hole there. And as I say, this is actually quite loud, so I'm going to have to sort of move this back a little bit, and I'll just give you like a little tootle if I can. That's something else I was going to talk about before. That was triple tonguing. So, you know, there are various forms of tonguing on the flute, and again, you know, the classical ways to do it, and then there are jazzy ways to do it. And if you've studied with great classical flute players, you will undoubtedly have a flawless technique with triple tonguing and double tonguing. But basically, the principle is with normal tonguing, regular tonguing. So double tonguing is when we're sort of saying tucka. So that's when you're going. So you can probably hear me almost articulating tucka. So that's sort of double tonguing. I mean, depending on the speed that is required, you can do it a lot faster than that. Then it gets to triple tonguing, which is tuckata. So tuckata. I'm not a particularly brilliant triple tonguer. I can do a little bit, but you know, it is really quite tricky to do. And as I say, more often not, it's not actually no. If you're playing, I was doing some recording the other day, and I did actually use some triple tonguing on that, and it sounded pretty good. But it's more to do with the fact that as I say, on a recording situation where you don't have to expend a lot of energy, you can really be quite sensitive with the microphone and everything else. So getting really close up to a microphone means that you have less, expending less energy to a certain extent, and you can be a little more delicate. You know, here in this studio, it's not very easy for me to actually do that, but you can tell that the piccolo itself is it's quite a nice little thing. I can see the needles going all over the shop at the moment. Michael is going to actually have a field day with my my recording of this particular, because he comes in and compresses everything, and sort of takes away all the highs and the lows and the peaks and the things when the needle goes into the red. And unfortunately, it's going into the red a lot. I don't think there's any more red it can go into. Michael, my apologies to you. So yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of things you can do with the piccolo. It's it works extremely well in jazz as well. And I don't actually have any piccolo tracks for you to play today, although I have done in the past, and that was a guy who I really love very much is Nelson Rangel, and it's almost like somebody whistling when he's playing the piccolo. It sounds beautiful. Okay. In the meantime, while I'm putting, actually, I didn't actually take this apart. I'll just take it apart so you can see that this actually is two separate parts. Okay, so you've got the head joint, which actually fits in this case, not inside, but it fits over the actual body of the piccolo, because the piccolo itself is actually quite small. So the head joint fits over it. And again, I would have that turned into mine like that, as opposed to blowing across it. Remember, you need this. That's the embouchure. We need to get that really nice and tight, and that's going to help you really define the notes when you're playing, especially down low. I've got a really nice track coming up here. Now, this is a guy who definitely was self-taught for sure with the flute, and again, his own approach and everything, and it's a really nice sound that he makes. And he's not around anymore, unfortunately. His name is Yusef Latif, and this is a track with him featuring, and this is called Delilah. just going to bring the sound down on that one, and because there's a trumpet solo coming up, and I just really wanted to play that because of Yusef's particular sound and his approach to flute playing. I should say it's a very individual sound, and as you can probably hear there, he uses vibrato all the way through. Pretty much any time he's actually playing, holding a tone for longer than a second, there's the vibrato is right in there. And Nelson Rangel is another guy that plays pretty much primarily only with vibrato. And I guess thinking of other guys like James Galway within the flute world, and I'm trying to think of his name now. Paul Lustig Dunkel is another very fine classical flute player. He was a principal flute player with the New York Ballet, and he had the most incredible vibrato actually. And again, I think he was another Julius Baker chap. Anyway, I'm going to move on. One of the reasons why I stopped there was also that I can carry on and show you the last two flutes that I've got with me here today. So this is the head joint, there we go, of my alto flute. So the alto flute is pitched it's in G, and so if I'm playing a G on the flute, it's C. So it's and it's a really, really, really nice flute to play. It's kind of considered to be almost like the flugelhorn of the flute world, if you will. So this particular model is by Pearl, who makes some very nice alto and bass flutes. And this one, so it's a solid silver head joint. Fortunately, the body itself is not solid silver. As you can see, this is unlike the other one, the concert flute that I showed you. This one actually has completely all covered tone holes, because actually when it gets to this sort of size, you can't really open the tone holes up, because then they will be too big to actually cover with your fingers. So once more, I'm going to be putting the head joint in. You need to be careful when you put your head joint in your flute. Make sure that you don't sort of squeeze the mechanism of the body. A lot of guys, when they're holding it and putting the flute together, will sort of hold it, across the, like that, basically across the rods at the side and whatever, and start ramming the head joint through and actually squeezing all of this stuff here, which anybody that's a flute technician out there will tell you it makes them cry when they see people doing that. So I'm just going to reach around and get my foot joint. So that's the foot joint that goes on to the main part of the body. I'm going to link that up there like that. So I need to pull that around just so I got it in the right position for my little pinky. All right, so this is the thing I was saying to you last week about when you get tubes that are sort of bigger than, like the basic concert flute, you start to actually be able to really just sort of sonically you can actually start to just create the sound from the air being vibrated within the flute. So by doing it like that, it's I guess to a certain extent you could consider it a technique. So you can hear I'm using vibrato. It's a really lovely flute to play because it actually just responds very easily. You don't have to work your embouchure too hard to actually get the notes. And with the flute like this, you can actually sort of do some more kind of techniques which rely upon sort of like percussive sounds. That kind of sort of singing along stuff, you know. Yeah, it's a flute I love playing, and again, it's one of those ones that I have at home. I do quite a bit of recording for various people around the world, and that's the beauty of the modern technology now, is that people can send me tracks and I can sort of do my bits and pieces on them, put them down onto my my DAW, my digital audio workstation, as they're known. Mine happens to be Cubasis, and I really enjoy working with that. It's pretty simple. It needs to be simple for me. And yeah, and I put the tracks down there and then flick them off by email. And it's as simple as that. And then they can just download those and put them onto their DAW, and then they can sort of do all their bits and pieces with those. But yeah, and I really enjoy doing the flute stuff because you know, it's something most people give me free range to do what I want, and often I can sort of like work out my own bits and pieces like harmonies and what have you, and it kind of works out pretty well. And when you've got the full range of flutes, well, full range of 4 flutes at least, you know, you can have some really nice sounding sort of choir type of things. I'll do some recording and bring those in so that you can actually hear some of that as well. All right, okay, so that's the alto flute, very nice flute, and I love playing that. I'm going to got one more flute for you, and I'm going to get that big fella out after this track, and I'm going to play a track by one of my very, very favourite flute players, and his name is Hubert Laws, and this is called All Soul. absolutely beautiful flute playing there by Hubert Laws. That was at the beginning of his career, probably about 40, 50 years ago. What am I saying? 40 or 50 years ago. I was reading something on Stuff recently about Jacinda Ardern saying softening the T's to make them D's. I guess it might be the Kiwi thing. I'm not sure. I don't think all Kiwis do that. I'm not being a Kiwi myself. Originally, I'm from the UK and English by birth. My mother and father were very, very keen on me saying my T's, and I got a slap over the wrist many occasions for not doing that. So I guess it's the radio way that we sort of, we cut out the sibilants and, those hard consonants that make the the sort of ch, and those things that make the levels, whack over into the red. But since I've actually done that 1,000 times today already with my flute and piccolo, Michael probably won't be expecting anything less from me. So anyway, I've got one last flute for you. All right, so it's here behind me. It's a big fella, so I'm just going to reach behind me and get the bits out as we go along. Sorry for the silence there. We should have some intermission music, really, shouldn't we? Right. So this is the head joint, basically, for the flute, and it's always a bit of you have to try and remember which way the thing goes round. So so I've got to do that. That's right. So I'm going to play it. Hold on, Alex. Which way are you going to play it? I'm going to play it like yes. I'm going to do that because that's the right way. I'm hoping. Has it been a while since I played this? I'm actually looking at it, and it suddenly looks like a different thing altogether. Anyway, I shall put the flute together slowly, and I'll get back to you. I'm trying to think how did I put this together? Gosh, it's not been that long since I played it. But this is basically the head joint right here. So I'm going to get the main body out. All right. So this is going to make a lot more sense now because I can actually do this. That's better. All right, so now then, it's just such a weird kind of instrument to, basically you've got to make the tubing kind of fit you and how it works. As you can see, so this is just the main part of the body, all right, with the head joint attached now. So now I've got this sort of set up like that. I've got... now we don't have we have almost looks like a saxophone kind of setup here with the keys, because they're so sort of spread apart that you actually have to have them like that. You just can't have like a conventional flute setup, and you certainly can't have open holes on the bass flute. That's definitely not going to work. So I've got that bit now. This is the main part of the head joint, sort of. So you've got that curved bit coming back into the main part of the body. Now I'm going to fit on the foot joint. You see, that's a fairly substantial piece of equipment there already. So that goes on there like that. Hope you can see all that going on. So just keep that up there. So now I've just got to make sure that that's going to... Yep, that's going to find my little pinky just perfectly. Now the very last bit that goes on... what else could you possibly need to play that? Well, what you do need is something called a crutch. And I'm not talking about that area down there. I'm talking about this as being the crutch. So this is a crutch that actually fits. This fits right in. Sorry, you can't see that, can you? This fits in here, but you probably can't even see it now. It fits in there because the flute is so heavy. You actually have to have something to actually support it, and that bit goes sort of up here, and you can kind of then just adjust it for yourself. That's better. So now I've actually got something that's going to be, so I can actually hold the flute, support it with the inside of my hand, as it were, there, and I've got it supported there too. So I've got a couple of decent sort of part points to actually support the flute with. So as you can see, it is quite a sort of substantial thing. I'm trying to look at it and see how you will be seeing it at home on the TV there. So you can see, look, there we go. That's all the way around there. So this is just a basic bass flute. I'll just play a few notes to get a few notes out. I have to move back a little bit. Let's move that round there. As you can see, I haven't played today. I'm just going to move that up. There we go. How did that tune also go? So you can hear it doesn't really even sound, I guess to a certain extent, it doesn't even sound like a flute anymore. Of course, it is a flute, but it's the sort of that sort of lower spectrum. So I'm assuming that from this that you'll be able to understand that when you get to sort of contralto and contrabass and subcontrabass flutes, that really, the sound spectrum is of a completely different order. And again, like I was saying before, with the alto flute, you can actually start to then you get all sorts of interesting sound effects, It's just a great big tube, basically, and unfortunately it plays, sort of kind of interesting stuff. What I like to do at home is actually sort of take it and use sort of different effects on it through my mixing desk, octave dividers and chorus and flange effects and delay and all sorts of bits and pieces like that. And when it's in a more ambient environment, it can sound really, really lovely. And again, I will actually sort of put together a piece at home, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to play that for you sometime soon. Probably will be in the new year. And and hopefully you'll be able to sort of get a better idea of like how the flute choir, like of bass, alto, concert and piccolo, how those instruments can all sound together. And I'll try and get some of the little arrangements set up so so hopefully that will work nicely, and just use different effects so that you can see what happens with the instrument itself. Again, this one is not something that I play a lot because it's actually really quite a quiet flute, and more often than not, if you see it, guys playing it in an orchestral situation, they either are not going to be heard at all, or they're going to be mic'd up really, really, really well so that you can hear them. But again, the bass flute itself is really, really quite quiet. But once you see these bigger fellas that they actually make in the flute range, then it makes this fella look, it makes him look quite small actually. Of course, which is not when you're actually holding it. It's actually a whole different ball game because it can be quite tiring, and you have to be very careful how you put them down. There we go. Okay, right, he's on the desk now. So that's basically kind of like where you are with the flute player. So the embouchure does change a little bit, with the lower notes on the bass flute. I tend to sort of go down at the corners of my mouth a little bit, which is maybe not necessarily you should do, but is how I can sort of get the lower notes a little bit easier. I can't play too high on any of these notes because it seems to be sort of sending the desk, into the thing's going to explode, I'm sure, with all the high notes that's going on. So I won't do that too much, otherwise it's not going to please Michael very much. So there you have it, a sort of a very potted history trip through the world of the flute, and there are fabulous flute players out there, far better than I am, and all I can do is show you what I can do, at least in this environment. And as I say, I will try and sort of put something together so that you can hear me playing in a slightly more, put me in slightly a rosier light, as it were. Anyway, I'm going to carry on now, and one of the first jazz flute players I ever really listened to was a guy called Herbie Mann, and this is a track of him playing, and this is called Yardbird Suite. once again. I'm going to just bring that track down a little bit because, we are here for a flute special, not a guitar special or anything else. And I don't want to waste too much time listening to other instruments because, like I say, it's a flute special, right? So let's make it about the flute. And, so I've come to the end of my flute instrument collection, and I will undoubtedly get some ethnic flutes over the next wee while, and once I've got those up, I'll bring those along as well, and I can show you my my dexterity on the shakuhachi, which obviously, even though it's a Japanese sort of flute, has been used in jazz, and I'm going to actually I'm going to get some stuff. It's a really excellent American shakuhachi player who does great jazz. So I'm going to bring that along so you can listen to some of his stuff as well. Although you could just go into YouTube and put shakuhachi jazz and you'll come up with probably the same sort of stuff that I'll bring along. But if you don't, I'll bring it along anyway. I've got time for, let me hear, oh gosh, it's 10 past already. I've got about another 10 minutes to go. And I know I spent quite a bit of time talking about the flute. So just to recap on a couple of things, just in case you happen to be a flute player out there, or you may be a beginner or whatever, and you weren't too sure about some of the bits and pieces I was talking about, I'll just demonstrate that embouchure again. And here we go. I'm actually, for those people at home listening on the radio, I know it's gone silent and I do apologise, but I'm trying to demonstrate my flute embouchure. So here's my normal lips. And here's the flute embouchure. You kind of have to sort of, squint your eyes. I guess it's sort of natural progression of actually sort of playing like that. Actually, until the mic's gone off. I'm back here now. Okay. When you sort of go, can you see my eyes are kind of like looking a little bit kind of, squinty? And there's a rather interesting situation happened with Dancing with the Stars when we did the series with Carl Doy, the original Dancing with the Stars series back in 2005, I think it was, when I first got the call for that, for 2005, 2006. I was Carl Doy's first call for the whole of the band. He was, after his drummer, he very nicely told me very nicely that Alex, he said, dear boy, he said, you're looking to, I wonder if you might be like to do the Dancing with the Stars. I said, oh, absolutely, yes, please, especially when he told me how much we were getting paid per show. And he said, you want to know that, you are the first call out of the whole band other than the drummer that I normally use. He said, now tell me, who would you like on trumpet? And who would you like on trombone? And who would you like on... So I gave him the list of the guys that I wanted to have worked with. And we all got to work together as well, which was Vaughan Roberts and Dave Bremner and Niels Olsen. And the rest of the band were fantastic. We all had a great time. And more often than not, when we got sort of solos within the band, within the arrangements that Carl wrote, the guys with the cameras would be there and they sort of get a close-up and so on and so forth. And I think there was one particular episode there I had a piccolo solo. And the camera sort of zoomed in on me when I was playing the piccolo with my face, looking like it did. And anyway, this chap got in touch with Carl after the show and he said, Carl, absolutely fantastic show, really loved it. No, tell me, who's that Chinese fellow on piccolo? And he actually meant it. So it became a bit of a joke. Every time I picked the piccolo up, I suddenly changed nationality. I became someone else. It was just the way I look, I guess, that's that particular, the face, that's the embouchure that I adopt. I mean, maybe some guys out there play piccolo and they don't have to look like that. I mean, but, that's me. So nothing much I can do about that. And so remember, if you're going to be playing flute, we need sort of like nice, sort of straight lip, flat lip across the front because it really does help. Unless you want to adopt the James Galway lip art approach. That says it doesn't work for me. It does work for others. Bob Shepherd, for one, he uses that. It's very, very good. So I've got just a short while now. I've been doing a lot of talking today, and I make no apologies because I need to talk, especially when it's about playing flute and all the other bits and pieces that are involved with that. So I will get back next week, which is going to be it's going to be Boxing Day, isn't it? Yes, I shall be back on Boxing Day, probably suffering from a massive hangover, no doubt. And I think the one after that is January the 2nd. Of course it will, yeah. So and that'll be the day after New Year's Day. So who knows? I might still have a hangover then. I hope not. I will do my best to be a picture of perfect health on both occasions. And anyway, just before I do play you out with my last track or so, I'd just like to wish you a very, very, very happy Christmas. I hope you have the most wonderful day. I really hope you get everything that you've desired, and I hope it's full of peace and love and happiness for you and your family. And if you're on your own, then I've been there too. I know what that's like, and you still make the most of the day. You can do that too. Hey, there's lots of people out there that will, want to spend the day with you. I'm sure, get out and have a good walk around and see what's going on, because I know what it's like to spend Christmas Day on your own. I've done it on a couple of occasions through probably most of my own fault, but there you go. That's just the way it is. But it's a very special day, and it's a special day for everyone, of course, I realise. And I hope you have a wonderful day yourselves. I hope the weather's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it too. Jump in the pool, have a bit of a swim. Very happy Christmas to you. I'm going to play you out with a wonderful track. This is by Buddy Collette and Herbie Mann, and this is called Perdido.